Our button is looking pretty good, and we could stop here if we wanted to. However, there's still more that we can do. So far, we have our link centered on the page, and we have this nice teal gradient background with some noise on top of it, but there's still more to do. So let's go ahead and switch over to our text editor. And the next thing we're going to do is set the text color to white so that it really pops off of that teal color. So we'll go ahead and save that out, switch over to Google Chrome and refresh the page. And as you can see, our text now really stands out against this teal colored background. Next, we're going to add some padding so that the text doesn't run right up against the sides of the button. So we'll say padding 15 pixels. And we should add some border radius so that our button has some nice rounded corners and doesn't appear just to be squared off. So we'll say WebKit border radius 30 pixels and Mozilla border radius 30 pixels. And then finally, for browsers that don't need the vendor prefix, we'll say border radius 30 pixels. And for browsers that don't support border radii, they'll just see a square button. So we'll go ahead and switch back to Google Chrome and refresh the browser. And as you can see, we now have this nice, really curvy button. So let's go ahead and switch back to TextMate. And next, we're going to go ahead and add a box shadow. So we'll say WebKit box shadow. And we'll say 0 pixels for the X offset, 1 pixel for the Y offset, and 1 pixel for the blur radius. And then we'll set the shadow color to black. And we can go ahead and copy that and paste it. And we'll just change the vendor prefix to Mozilla. And then we'll paste it one more time and remove the vendor prefix for browsers that don't need it. We'll go ahead and save that out. And when we switch back and refresh, you can see that we now have this nice little shadow right below our button. And that really helps the button pop off of the page and appear to have a little bit more depth. So let's go ahead and add some text shadow to the text inside of our button. Go ahead and scroll down here. First, we'll type WebKit text shadow. We'll set the X offset to 0 pixels. We'll set the Y offset to -1 pixels. We'll set the blur radius to 1 pixel. And we'll give it a shadow color of black. And we'll go ahead and copy and paste this. Change the vendor prefix to Mozilla. And then we'll remove the vendor prefix for browsers that don't need it. And we'll switch back to the browser and refresh. And as you can see, we now have this really nice text shadow on the inside of our text, and this makes the text appear as though it's inset into the button, when in fact the shadow is actually just slightly above the text rather than being slightly below it. So one last thing we need to do to this button is set the outline to none. And before I save this, I'm actually going to tab over to this button so you can see what that outline might look like in other browsers. And if we go back to TextMate and save that, that should get rid of any sort of ugly outline effect that appears in other browsers. Now, we need to set a focus state and an active state to our button, because right now, when we click our button, nothing really happens. So let's change that. We'll switch over to TextMate, and we need to select the sign up button again, and we'll use the pseudo selector focus. First, we're going to change the background color, and this is very similar to what we did previously, so we can actually just go ahead and copy these backgrounds and paste them down here. Now we're just going to change these colors around. So, I have some very specific colors picked out. Of course, you can use whatever colors that you'd like. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy these over to the WebKit styling. Just like that. And then finally, we need to have a fallback for browsers that don't support gradients. So we'll go ahead and type that in and save that out. And if we switch back to the browser and refresh, we can now tab over to this button, and as you can see, it changes colors when we tab over to it. So that's our focus state. Now we need to set an active state for when we actually click on the button. So let's do that. First, we need to select the button again, sign up, and we'll use the pseudo selector active. Now once again, we're going to be using these same background gradients and noise images. So we'll just go ahead and paste those in. And once again, I have some very specific colors picked out, but you can use whatever colors that you'd like. And I'll just go ahead and copy and paste those to the different stylings here for WebKit, and our background color will stay the same. Now, this isn't going to do a whole lot for our button. All we're really doing here is reversing the colors. So when we click on our button, it appears as though the colors are reversing and the button looks like it's being pressed in a little bit, but there's still some other visual problems with this. We need to move our shadow and we need to change the color of this text so that it looks like it's being shadowed a little bit. We'll go ahead and switch back to TextMate and we'll say WebKit box shadow. And we're going to actually use an inset shadow. We'll say 0 pixels for the X offset, 1 pixel for the Y offset, and 5 pixels for the blur radius. We'll set the color to black. We'll go ahead and copy and paste that. And just change the vendor prefix. And then we'll paste it in one more time and remove the vendor prefix entirely for browsers that don't need it. And then we'll go ahead and change the color here, again, so the text appears as though it's being shadowed when it's being pressed into the page. So let's go ahead and switch back to Google Chrome and refresh. And now, when we press this button, the shadow below disappears and we have a shadow on the inside of our button. So it appears as though it's being depressed into the page. That about wraps things up. Remember, many of the decisions we made were purely aesthetic, and you can mix and match all of these choices to suit your own project.